If kindness can change the course of a kingdom, it often begins with opening a single door. The wind howled like a living thing across the frozen hills of Black Pine Ridge, driving curtains of snow against the tiny cabin where Evelyn Carter had learned to survive with little more than determination, quiet faith, and a fire she refused to let die. Winter had swallowed the valley 3 days earlier, burying fences beneath thick white drifts and turning every familiar trail into a blank wilderness. Most people had already decided that anyone foolish enough to wander outside tonight belonged to the storm now. But Evelyn never found comfort in believing the worst about the world. She stirred another piece of oak into the fireplace and wrapped her wool blanket tighter around her shoulders as the old cabin creaked beneath another powerful gust. The clock on the mantel had just slipped past midnight when a strange sound reached her ears. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a branch scraping across the roof. It was softer, slow, uneven, almost like someone gathering the last of their strength. She held her breath. There it was again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Her heart began to race. No traveler would be climbing this mountain during a blizzard. No neighbor lived within 5 miles. Every sensible thought told her to stay where she was, to bolt the door and let morning answer whatever mystery waited outside. Instead, she reached for the lantern hanging beside the fireplace, lifted it with steady hands, and crossed the worn wooden floor. The scratching stopped the moment her fingers touched the iron latch. For one silent heartbeat, the world seemed to disappear. Even the storm held its breath. Then Evelyn slowly pulled the door open. A blast of icy air rushed inside, scattering glowing embers across the stone hearth. Snow spun wildly beneath the lantern light, and for a second she saw nothing except swirling white. Then her eyes found the shape lying across the threshold. A massive white wolf rested in the snow, its thick winter coat dusted with frost until it almost disappeared against the landscape itself. One paw twitched weakly. Its breathing came in slow, shallow clouds that vanished into the freezing darkness. Its pale silver eyes opened just enough to meet hers. There was no growl, no warning, only exhaustion. Evelyn had seen frightened animals before. Growing up alone in these mountains taught her how easily fear could disguise itself as anger. Yet something about this creature felt different. It carried an odd dignity, as though even the storm hesitated to touch it. She glanced into the endless darkness behind the wolf, expecting someone to appear calling for a missing animal. But the mountain remained silent except for the relentless wind. "You picked the right cabin," she whispered, kneeling carefully in the snow. "Or maybe I needed someone to knock tonight." The wolf did not move away when she reached out. Its fur felt colder than the falling snow itself, and beneath the thick coat, she could feel faint trembling. Whatever had driven it here had taken nearly everything it had left. Evelyn knew bringing a wild animal inside sounded foolish. Every lesson she had ever heard insisted that wolves belonged to the forest. But leaving it outside meant certain death before sunrise, and she couldn't close the door on a living soul simply because kindness carried risk. Setting the lantern on the porch, she slipped both arms beneath the heavy animal. It weighed far more than she expected, forcing her boots to slide across the icy floorboards as she slowly pulled it inside inch by inch. The effort left her breathing hard, but eventually the wolf lay beside the fireplace where gentle warmth began chasing the frost from its thick white fur. She shut the cabin door firmly behind them, sealing the storm outside once more. The tiny room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, almost as though the lonely cabin had been waiting for a second heartbeat all along. Evelyn looked toward her narrow bed, then back at the shivering wolf. There was only one place warm enough tonight. Without another moment of hesitation, she gathered every blanket she owned, spread them across the mattress, and whispered with a tired smile, "Looks like you're getting the better half of the bed." As the fire crackled brighter and snow continued falling beyond the frosted window, the wolf closed its eyes for the first time since she had found it. And somewhere deep beneath the roar of the blizzard, fate quietly began rewriting 2 lives. Morning never truly arrived. The storm only surrendered a little of its darkness, trading the endless black sky for a pale gray light that filtered through the frost covering Evelyn Carter's small cabin windows. Snow continued to fall in slow, silent waves, softening every corner of the mountain until the entire world seemed wrapped inside a blanket of white. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only glowing embers beneath the iron grate. Evelyn stirred awake before the first hint of dawn, chilled by the cold creeping back into the room. For one brief, sleepy moment, she wondered whether the strange visitor from the night before had been nothing more than an unusually vivid dream. Then she felt the steady warmth beside her. The great white wolf remained exactly where she had left it, stretched across most of the narrow bed beneath layers of quilts that looked almost comically small compared to its enormous frame. One pointed ear twitched at the sound of her breathing, but it did not wake. Relief settled quietly into her chest. It had survived the night. She carefully slipped from the mattress, trying not to disturb it, and added another split log to the fireplace. Soon the familiar crackling filled the cabin once again, accompanied by the comforting scent of burning oak. She warmed a kettle of water, poured a little into a ceramic bowl, and searched through the small wooden cabinet where she kept dried herbs gathered during warmer seasons. Mountain sage, wild chamomile, pine needles. Her grandmother had once taught her that nature often whispered its remedies to anyone patient enough to listen. Evelyn had believed those lessons ever since she was a little girl wandering these same forests with small hands wrapped inside much larger ones. She soaked a clean cloth in the warm water and slowly returned to the bed. The wolf opened its silver eyes as she approached. This time there was awareness behind them, calm and thoughtful rather than frightened. Neither of them moved for several seconds. It was a quiet conversation without words. Evelyn smiled gently. "Good morning," she said softly. "I suppose that means you decided to stay." The wolf blinked once, almost as though acknowledging her greeting. She laughed under her breath at the thought. "Do not worry. I am not expecting an answer." Kneeling beside the bed, she gently pressed the warm cloth against patches of frozen fur where ice still clung stubbornly beneath the thick winter coat. The animal remained remarkably still, watching every careful movement with surprising patience. Up close, Evelyn noticed details she had missed during the frantic rescue. The wolf's fur was impossibly clean beneath the frost, almost shimmering where the firelight touched it. Around its neck the hair formed a natural silver mantle unlike anything she had ever seen in ordinary wildlife. Its paws were enormous, yet graceful, and even resting quietly it carried an unmistakable sense of quiet strength. "You are beautiful," she whispered before realizing she had spoken aloud. The wolf lowered its gaze for an instant, almost shyly, then slowly rested its head against the blankets again. Evelyn continued cleaning away bits of ice, while humming an old mountain hymn her mother had loved. The melody drifted through the cabin, mixing with the sound of the wind outside and the steady rhythm of the fire. For the first time in many months, the little home no longer felt painfully empty. It felt shared. After preparing a simple breakfast of warm oatmeal and fresh bread she had baked 2 days earlier, Evelyn filled another bowl with clean water and placed it near the bed. The wolf lifted its head and drank slowly before looking back at her with those strangely intelligent eyes. "There you go," she said. "One step at a time. Nobody gets stronger by rushing." Hours passed peacefully. She mended a worn flannel shirt near the fireplace, while the wolf slept more deeply than before, its breathing now slow and even. Occasionally she glanced toward the bed to make sure it was still comfortable, smiling every time she found its chest rising and falling in quiet rhythm. Outside, the storm refused to let go of the mountain. Snow piled against the windows until only narrow ribbons of daylight remained visible. Even if she had wanted to leave for supplies, the weather had already made that decision for her. They would both remain inside for another day. As afternoon settled over the cabin, a sudden gust rattled the walls hard enough to shake loose a dusting of snow from the roof. The loud noise startled Evelyn. Before she could react, the wolf was already standing. Its movement was astonishingly smooth despite the exhaustion it had shown only hours earlier. It positioned itself between her and the front door, ears raised toward the sound outside. The protective gesture caught her completely by surprise. She had rescued it, yet somehow it now looked ready to protect her instead. Another silence passed between them, deeper than before. Evelyn slowly stepped closer until she stood beside the magnificent animal rather than behind it. She rested one cautious hand against the thick white fur along its shoulder. The wolf did not flinch. It simply remained there, watching the door until the wind faded once more. Only then did it relax, releasing a slow breath before settling back onto the wooden floor near the fire instead of returning to the bed. Evelyn looked at the fading daylight beyond the frosted glass and smiled to herself. Whatever strange path had carried this mysterious creature to her lonely cabin, she could not shake the feeling that the mountain had delivered more than a lost wolf. It had delivered a promise that neither of them understood yet, one waiting patiently beneath the falling snow for the right moment to reveal itself. The third morning arrived wrapped in an eerie stillness that felt even stranger than the storm itself. Evelyn Carter opened her eyes expecting to hear the familiar rhythm of slow breathing beside the fire, but the cabin greeted her with silence. She sat upright immediately, her heart skipping a beat as she looked toward the blankets where the great white wolf had rested through the previous day. They were empty. The quilts lay folded back as though someone had risen carefully instead of an animal simply wandering away. For several long seconds, she searched every corner of the cabin. The chair beside the window was empty. The fireplace glowed softly without a single white hair nearby. Even the bowl of water had been pushed neatly against the wall instead of left where she remembered placing it. A chill unrelated to the weather traveled through her. She hurried to the front door and pulled it open. Fresh snow covered the porch in an untouched blanket of white. No enormous paw prints led away from the cabin. No trail disappeared into the forest. It was as if the wolf had simply vanished into the morning air. Evelyn stepped outside anyway, shielding her eyes from the pale light reflecting across the mountains. The blizzard had finally weakened, leaving only gentle flakes drifting through the quiet pines. The world looked peaceful again, but something about that peace felt unfinished. She whispered softly into the empty woods, "I hope you made it home." The words disappeared into the cold breeze without an answer. A strange disappointment settled inside her as she returned indoors. She told herself this was always how the story had to end. Wild creatures belonged to the mountains, not inside a lonely cabin. She added another log to the fire and began tidying the room, carefully folding the blankets that had kept her unexpected guest alive. As she lifted the final quilt, she noticed something unusual resting beneath it. A single silver feather lay on the mattress, shining faintly despite the dim light. Evelyn frowned. Wolves did not leave feathers behind. She picked it up, turning it slowly between her fingers. It felt warmer than it should have, almost as though it carried its own quiet life. Before she could wonder any longer, 3 slow knocks echoed against the front door. They were calm, deliberate, and impossibly polite. Evelyn froze. Nobody visited this mountain without warning, especially after a storm that had buried every road for miles. She placed the feather carefully on the mantel and crossed the room once again. When she opened the door, she found a tall man standing on the porch. Snow rested across the shoulders of his dark charcoal coat, while loose strands of black hair brushed against his forehead in the cold wind. He looked no older than his early 30s. His posture was straight despite obvious exhaustion, and his gray eyes carried the same quiet intensity she could not explain. For the briefest instant those eyes felt strangely familiar. The stranger offered a gentle smile that never quite reached the sadness hidden behind it. "Good morning," he said with a calm voice that seemed almost too steady for someone standing alone in the snow. "I hope I am not disturbing you." Evelyn studied him carefully. His clothes were damp from melting snow, yet he showed none of the panic or desperation of a traveler who had lost his way. Instead, he stood with remarkable patience, waiting for her answer as though he already trusted whatever it would be. "Can I help you?" she asked. He hesitated, glancing toward the warm light spilling from the cabin before meeting her eyes again. "I was wondering if I might come inside for a little while. The mountain is less forgiving than it appears." Something in his words made her smile despite herself. "You have a talent for understatement." He laughed quietly, and the sound carried an unexpected warmth that seemed to chase away the lingering loneliness inside the little cabin. Evelyn stepped aside without another question. "Please come in before you freeze." "Thank you," he replied sincerely. The moment he crossed the threshold, he paused beside the fireplace and closed his eyes for a heartbeat as the warmth surrounded him. Evelyn noticed faint scratches across the sleeve of his coat and a small tear near one shoulder, as though he had spent the night struggling through rough terrain. "You look like you have had a difficult journey," she said while pouring hot tea into a ceramic mug. He accepted it with both hands, grateful for the warmth. You could say the mountain had other plans for me. She tilted her head curiously. Did you lose your traveling companions? A shadow crossed his expression almost too quickly to notice. For a little while. Will they come looking for you? His smile returned, softer this time. Eventually. Evelyn nodded, deciding not to press further. Everyone carried stories they were not ready to tell. She remembered how the silent wolf had trusted her without explanation, and somehow this stranger inspired the very same feeling. As she handed him a slice of warm bread spread with homemade blackberry jam, their fingers brushed for only an instant. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the snow continued drifting gently across Black Pine Ridge, while inside the tiny cabin the stranger looked around the room with quiet appreciation. His gaze rested briefly on the folded blankets beside the bed, then on the silver feather resting atop the mantel. Something almost like recognition flickered across his face before disappearing beneath another calm smile. Evelyn noticed the expression but said nothing. Deep inside, a quiet certainty began taking shape, whispering that the mysterious visitor standing beside her fire and the magnificent white wolf she had rescued were connected by a secret the mountain had not finished revealing. The afternoon settled gently over the cabin, painting the snow outside with soft shades of silver as the stranger slowly regained his strength beside the fire. Evelyn Carter noticed that although he accepted every simple kindness she offered with sincere gratitude, he revealed almost nothing about himself. He spoke with quiet confidence, choosing every word carefully, never sounding uncertain even when admitting that he had nowhere to go for the moment. There was something unusual about him. His hands carried the roughness of someone accustomed to hard journeys, yet his posture belonged to a man who had never needed to prove his place in any room. Every movement was calm, measured, and almost graceful. Evelyn poured another cup of hot tea and placed it on the small wooden table. "I never asked your name," she said with a gentle smile. The stranger looked into the dancing flames for a brief moment before answering. "Rowan." He lifted his eyes toward her. "Just Rowan." She nodded without questioning the simplicity of the answer. "Well then, Rowan, I am Evelyn." "I know," he replied softly before catching himself. A faint smile crossed his face. "Your mailbox has your name carved into it." Evelyn laughed quietly. "That makes much more sense than the mysterious explanation I imagined." Rowan smiled with her, relieved that she had accepted the answer so easily. They spent the next several hours sharing ordinary conversations that somehow made the lonely cabin feel warmer than ever before. Evelyn told him about the changing seasons on Black Pine Ridge, about collecting wild berries in late summer, repairing the roof every autumn, and how the first snowfall always arrived earlier than people expected. Rowan listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions instead of merely waiting for his turn to speak. He seemed fascinated by the peaceful life she had built for herself far away from crowded towns and endless responsibilities. "Do you never feel lonely?" he asked quietly as evening light settled across the windows. Evelyn considered the question before answering. "Sometimes. But loneliness is different from unhappiness. The mountain reminds me every day that being alone does not mean being forgotten." Rowan lowered his eyes, repeating her words silently as though committing them to memory. "That is wiser than most people realize." She tilted her head with curiosity. "What about you? Where's home?" A brief silence followed. Rowan watched the fire carefully, as though searching for an answer hidden inside the glowing embers. "Far from here," he finally said, "and close enough that people are probably looking for me." Evelyn smiled kindly. "Then they must care about you very much." Something almost painful flickered across his expression before disappearing behind another calm smile. "I hope they do." She sensed there was far more behind those words than he wished to share, and she respected the quiet boundary he had drawn. Instead of asking more questions, she reached for the basket of fresh bread cooling near the window and began preparing a simple supper. Rowan stood almost instinctively. "May I help? You are supposed to be resting." "I have rested more during the past 2 days than I usually do in a month." She raised an eyebrow with playful disbelief. "That sounds unhealthy." "It probably is." Soon they found themselves working side by side in the tiny kitchen. Evelyn chopped vegetables while Rowan carefully stirred a pot of vegetable stew over the fire. He handled the wooden spoon with surprising familiarity, earning an amused smile from her. "You cook?" she asked. "Not often," he admitted. but I remember enough not to burn dinner. That is already better than many people." Their shared laughter filled the cabin, blending naturally with the gentle crackling of the fire. For the first time in a very long while, Evelyn realized she was no longer talking simply to fill the silence. Conversation flowed effortlessly between them, comfortable and unforced. After supper, the wind outside finally grew quiet. Rowan stepped onto the porch, breathing deeply as fresh mountain air drifted through the pine trees. The storm clouds had broken apart, revealing a sky scattered with countless stars. Evelyn joined him moments later, wrapping a wool shawl around her shoulders. Together they stood without speaking, watching moonlight sparkle across the untouched snow. "It is beautiful," Rowan whispered. "It always is after a storm," Evelyn replied. "The mountain has a way of making people believe everything begins again." Rowan looked toward her instead of the landscape. In the pale moonlight, her kindness seemed brighter than the snow surrounding them. She had opened her home to a stranger without asking for anything in return. She had offered warmth before questions, trust before suspicion, and compassion before judgment. Very few people in his world still believed such generosity existed. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "why did you help me?" She looked surprised by the question. "Because someone needed help. You did not know whether I deserved it." Her smile was soft and unwavering. Kindness should not wait for proof. Rowan fell silent. Her answer settled deeply within him, reaching a place that titles, victories, and power had never managed to touch. At that same moment, many miles away beyond the snow-covered mountains, riders carrying silver banners crossed the frozen valleys beneath the night sky. Lanterns swung beside their saddles while worried voices echoed through the forest. They searched every trail, every abandoned shelter, and every hidden pass with growing urgency. The only words repeated from one rider to the next carried the weight of an entire kingdom. "Find the Alpha King before another sunrise." Back at the cabin, neither Evelyn nor Rowan heard those distant calls. They remained beneath the quiet stars, unaware that fate was already guiding countless footsteps toward the little home where the greatest secret on the mountain patiently waited to reveal itself. The following morning dawned brighter than any since the storm had begun, and sunlight spilled across the endless snow like liquid gold, making Black Pine Ridge appear peaceful enough to hide every secret beneath its glittering surface. Evelyn Carter stepped onto the porch carrying a wooden bucket, smiling as she breathed in the crisp mountain air. The silence felt different today. Birds had returned to the pine branches, and somewhere farther down the hillside a narrow stream could finally be heard beneath the melting ice. Behind her, Rowan emerged from the cabin carrying an armful of split firewood before she could protest. "I told you yesterday that you are still supposed to be recovering," Evelyn said with a gentle laugh. Rowan placed the wood beside the porch wall. "And I told you yesterday that I recover faster when I am useful." She shook her head with amused surrender. "You always have an answer. Only when I am fortunate enough to be asked the right question." Their easy conversation felt strangely natural, as though they had known one another far longer than only a few days. Together they completed the morning chores without rushing. Rowan repaired a loose shutter that had nearly broken during the blizzard while Evelyn collected fresh water from the nearby spring. Every ordinary task seemed lighter when shared, and neither of them noticed how quickly the hours slipped away. Yet beyond the peaceful mountain, another story was unfolding. Riders wearing silver cloaks continued crossing frozen valleys beneath the royal crest embroidered upon their shoulders. Every village received the same message. Every crossroads carried the same warning. The Alpha King had disappeared during the storm, and no trail had yet revealed where he had gone. The Royal Council promised generous rewards for reliable information, but beneath the formal announcement lived something far more urgent than money. Fear had quietly spread throughout the kingdom. If the Alpha King remained missing much longer, uncertainty would begin reaching every corner of the realm. By late afternoon, the search finally reached the nearest mountain settlement below Black Pine Ridge. The small general store buzzed with worried conversations as travelers exchanged rumors beside the old potbelly stove. Some insisted the Alpha King had been injured while protecting distant borderlands. Others believed he had vanished deep within the mountains after chasing an unknown threat. No one truly knew the truth, yet every version of the story grew larger with each telling. Evelyn had walked into the village carrying a basket of homemade bread to trade for flour and lamp oil, unaware that she had arrived in the middle of those anxious discussions. She greeted familiar faces with her usual kindness before noticing unusual banners hanging outside the trading post. "What happened?" she quietly asked Mrs. Holloway, the elderly shopkeeper who had known Evelyn since childhood. The older woman leaned closer, lowering her voice almost instinctively. "The kingdom is searching for its ruler. Riders have been passing through since sunrise." Evelyn looked toward the road where fresh horse tracks crossed the snow. "Do they know where he disappeared?" Mrs. Holloway slowly shook her head. "No, they only know he never returned home." Evelyn glanced through the frosted window toward the distant mountains surrounding her cabin. For reasons she could not explain, her thoughts drifted immediately to Rowan. She remembered the weariness in his eyes when he had first arrived, the careful way he answered every question, and the sadness that lingered beneath even his warmest smile. It was only a passing thought, she reminded herself. Plenty of travelers found themselves stranded during severe storms. There was no reason to connect him with stories about a missing king. Still, a quiet uneasiness settled into her heart. After gathering her supplies, Evelyn thanked the shopkeeper and began the long walk home before sunset. Snow crunched beneath her boots while soft light filtered through the towering pines. Halfway up the mountain, she noticed fresh hoofprints crossing the narrow trail. They were recent, perhaps no more than an hour old. Someone else had already climbed toward the upper ridge. She instinctively quickened her pace. When the cabin finally came into view, Rowan was standing outside repairing the fence she had been meaning to fix since autumn. He looked up immediately, offering the same calm smile that had greeted her every morning since his arrival. Relief washed over her before she fully understood why. "You are back sooner than I expected," he said. Evelyn set down the basket and nodded. The village was unusually busy. Rowan paused, studying her expression. Something happened. She hesitated before answering. "The kingdom is searching for someone important." For the first time since they had met, the smile faded from Rowan's face. He looked toward the distant horizon where the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. "I thought they might reach this area soon," he admitted quietly. Evelyn searched his eyes, sensing the invisible weight hidden behind those simple words. "Do you know the person they are looking for?" Rowan remained silent for several long seconds before finally meeting her gaze again. "Yes," he answered softly. "I know him very well." His voice carried neither fear nor surprise, only the quiet certainty of a man who understood that the peaceful days inside the little cabin were slowly coming to an end, even though neither of them yet realized just how close destiny had already drawn to Evelyn's front door. The peaceful rhythm of the mountain lasted only until the next sunrise. Evelyn Carter was preparing breakfast when the distant sound of horses echoed through the pine forest. It was faint at first, almost blending with the breeze, but with every passing minute it grew clearer until dozens of steady hoofbeats rolled across the snowy hills. Rowan stopped splitting firewood outside the cabin and slowly lifted his head toward the sound. His calm expression did not disappear, yet something in his eyes quietly changed. It was the look of a man who recognized exactly who was coming long before they appeared. Evelyn stepped onto the porch beside him, following his gaze toward the winding trail below. Between the snow-covered trees, flashes of polished silver caught the morning sunlight. Riders, many of them. They moved with perfect discipline, spreading across the mountain path with practiced precision rather than panic. Their banners carried the same crest Evelyn had seen hanging in the village the previous afternoon. Her heart tightened. "They found the mountain," she whispered. Rowan nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes. Are they searching every cabin?" "They will search every place where hope still exists." Before Evelyn could ask what he meant, another sound reached them from the opposite direction. More horses, more voices. Soon figures began appearing from several trails at once. The mountain that had felt wonderfully empty only days before now filled with travelers wearing heavy winter cloaks. Some were villagers who had followed the royal riders out of curiosity. Others were elders from nearby settlements, eager to witness whatever important discovery might unfold. The tiny clearing surrounding Evelyn's cabin gradually became crowded with unfamiliar faces. She instinctively stepped backward, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Rowan remained quietly beside her, neither hiding nor moving forward. The captain leading the royal riders finally dismounted a few yards from the porch. His polished silver cloak bore the emblem of the kingdom stitched in blue across the shoulder. Snow clung to his boots, yet he seemed to notice nothing except the man standing beside Evelyn. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire clearing fell silent. The captain removed his gloves. Then, without hesitation, he dropped to one knee. Every rider behind him immediately followed. One after another, dozens of armored guards knelt in the snow until the entire royal escort bowed their heads in complete silence. Gasps spread through the gathered villagers. Evelyn looked from the kneeling soldiers to Rowan in complete confusion. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed unwilling to interrupt the moment. Finally, the captain lowered his head even farther and said with absolute respect, "Your Majesty, the kingdom has been waiting for your return." Evelyn felt the world stop. She turned slowly toward Rowan, searching his face for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, she found only quiet acceptance. The warmth, the humility, the gentle smile, the thoughtful conversations by the fireplace, none of them had been false. Yet they had never been the whole truth. Rowan looked at her with the same kindness he had shown from the beginning. "I was hoping for one more peaceful morning," he admitted softly. Evelyn could barely find her voice. "You are the Alpha King?" He answered with a small, apologetic nod. "Yes." She stared at him in stunned silence, remembering every ordinary moment they had shared inside the tiny cabin. She remembered handing him tea without ceremony, laughing with him while preparing supper, asking him whether anyone cared enough to search for him. The realization rushed over her all at once, leaving her almost breathless. Around them, whispers spread rapidly through the crowd. Some villagers looked astonished. Others looked toward Evelyn with disbelief, wondering how a woman living alone in the mountains had unknowingly welcomed the ruler of the kingdom into her home. The captain rose only after Rowan gave a slight gesture of permission. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "the council has been deeply concerned. The entire realm feared the worst after the storm." Rowan looked across the snowy landscape before answering. "The mountain offered me shelter when I needed it most. Because of that, I stand here today." The captain followed his gaze toward Evelyn. His expression softened with sincere gratitude. "Then we owe this lady more than words can express." Several guards lowered their heads respectfully toward her. Evelyn felt completely unprepared for such attention. She had never sought recognition. She had simply opened her door because someone had needed warmth. Rowan stepped closer to her, speaking quietly enough that only she could hear. "I wanted you to know me before you knew my title." Evelyn met his eyes, still overwhelmed, but beginning to understand why every answer he had given seemed carefully incomplete. The lonely traveler had been real. The kindness they shared had been real. Only his name had carried a weight far greater than she could have imagined. As snowflakes drifted gently through the bright morning air, the little cabin that had quietly hidden the kingdom's greatest secret stood surrounded by a kneeling royal guard, astonished villagers, and a future neither Evelyn nor Rowan could ever again pretend was ordinary. No one moved. The only sound left in the clearing was the gentle whisper of snow settling across the pine branches, while every pair of eyes remained fixed on Evelyn Carter and the man she had known only as Rowan. The silence should have been comforting, yet it quickly became heavy beneath the weight of countless questions. Murmurs spread through the gathered villagers, growing louder with every passing second. How could she not know? One voice whispered. She kept the Alpha King hidden. Another answered before anyone else could. Or perhaps she wanted him all to herself. The words drifted through the cold air until they reached Evelyn's ears. She lowered her eyes, not because she believed them, but because she suddenly realized how easily strangers could invent a story when they had not witnessed the truth. An elderly council elder stepped forward from the crowd, leaning upon a polished walking staff carved with the ancient crest of the mountain settlements. He bowed respectfully toward Rowan before turning his attention to Evelyn. His expression was not cruel, but it carried the quiet suspicion of a man searching for certainty. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "this young woman has offered you shelter, and for that we are grateful. However, the kingdom must understand exactly how these events unfolded. We cannot ignore that you disappeared while she remained the only person who knew where you were." More whispers followed. Evelyn clasped her hands together to keep them from trembling. She wanted to explain everything, but no explanation seemed large enough to silence so many assumptions. Before she could speak, another villager raised his voice. Perhaps she recognized him from the beginning. Perhaps she hoped for a reward. Perhaps she convinced him to remain here. Each suggestion became more imaginative than the last, spreading through the gathering like footprints across fresh snow. Evelyn finally lifted her head. "That is not true," she said quietly. "I only helped someone who needed help." A few people listened. Others remained unconvinced. Rowan watched the growing confusion without interrupting. His calm expression never changed, but those who knew him well noticed the quiet firmness settling into his posture. The captain of the royal guard looked toward his king, waiting for instruction, yet Rowan simply took one slow step forward until he stood beside Evelyn instead of behind her. The movement alone silenced several conversations. He looked first at the villagers, then at the elders, and finally at every royal guard still standing respectfully around the cabin. His voice, when he spoke, remained gentle, yet it carried naturally across the clearing without effort. "You are asking the wrong question." Every face turned toward him. "The question is not why I remained here." He paused briefly, allowing the silence to settle once again. "The question is why I am still alive." Nobody answered. Rowan looked toward the little cabin, its chimney releasing a thin ribbon of smoke into the bright winter sky. "When the storm covered these mountains, I lost my strength long before I found this place. Snow erased every trail. Darkness hid every landmark. I would not have survived another hour alone." His eyes met Evelyn's. Gratitude filled them with quiet honesty. She did not ask who I was. She did not ask what I could offer her. She opened her door before she knew my name. The elder listened carefully, but uncertainty still lingered upon his face. "Even so, Your Majesty, some may still wonder why fate brought you specifically to this cabin." Rowan smiled faintly. "Then allow me to answer that as well." He turned toward the gathered crowd, and for the first time a warmth entered his voice that reminded Evelyn of every peaceful evening they had shared beside the fireplace. "If anyone insists on placing blame for where I was found." He glanced upward as delicate snowflakes drifted lazily from the clouds. A gentle smile crossed his face. "Blame the snow." Complete silence followed. The unexpected answer seemed to stop every whispered accusation before another could even begin. Rowan continued before anyone recovered. "The storm chose the mountain. The wind chose the path. The snow carried me to her door. Evelyn made only one choice, and it was kindness." He stepped closer to her until they stood shoulder to shoulder. "No law should ever punish compassion. No rumor should ever overshadow goodness." The captain of the royal guard lowered his head respectfully. One by one, the soldiers followed his example once again, not only toward their king this time, but toward the woman standing beside him. The gesture spread quietly through the clearing. Several villagers who had repeated the earlier rumors looked down with visible embarrassment. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward first, offering Evelyn a gentle smile. "We judged too quickly." Others nodded in silent agreement. The elder rested both hands upon his staff before bowing respectfully toward Evelyn. "Your kindness honored this mountain long before we understood its importance." Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes, though she smiled through them. She had never wished to become the center of anyone's attention. She had only followed the simple belief that no living soul should be left alone in the cold. Rowan looked at her with quiet admiration. In that moment, he realized the kingdom had searched endlessly for its missing ruler, yet the greatest treasure he had discovered during the storm had never been a place. It had been the extraordinary heart waiting inside a humble cabin where kindness asked no questions before opening the door. The mountain remained quiet long after the whispers had faded, as though even the ancient pines understood that something far greater than a royal search had reached its conclusion. The royal guards slowly rose from their respectful bows, while the gathered villagers stepped back to give Rowan and Evelyn the space neither of them had expected to need. Sunlight reflected across the fresh snow, bathing the little cabin in a warm golden glow that seemed impossible after the long winter storm. Rowan turned toward Evelyn with the same gentle expression she had first seen when he stood shivering outside her door. Only now there was no reason left to hide the truth. "There is something you deserve to know," he said quietly. Evelyn met his eyes without fear. "Then tell me." Rowan nodded once before looking toward the endless white mountains stretching beyond the trees. The night the storm found me, I had been returning from the northern border after settling a dispute between neighboring territories. The journey should have taken only a few hours, but the weather changed faster than anyone predicted. The snow became so heavy that even my strongest guards lost sight of one another. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried the memory of that lonely night. When I realized they could no longer follow me safely, I shifted into my wolf form to survive the freezing temperatures and search for shelter. I believed instinct would lead me home. He smiled softly, almost amused by fate itself. Instead, it led me to your doorstep. Evelyn remembered the exhausted white wolf lying motionless beneath the drifting snow, the pale silver eyes watching her without fear, and the quiet trust that had passed between them before a single word had ever been spoken. Everything suddenly fit together with remarkable clarity. You remembered everything, she whispered. Rowan nodded. Every moment. He glanced toward the cabin. I remember hearing your voice before I could even lift my head. I remember feeling warmth for the first time after hours of endless cold. I remember waking beside your fire and realizing that someone had chosen compassion without asking whether I deserved it. His eyes reflected quiet gratitude that no title could ever replace. Kings spend their lives being respected because of crowns. Very few are ever shown kindness without one. Evelyn lowered her gaze, humbled by the sincerity in his words. I only did what I hoped someone would do for me. Rowan smiled. That is exactly why it mattered. The captain of the royal guard listened silently nearby, while the villagers remained respectfully still, sensing that this conversation belonged to something far deeper than politics or ceremony. Rowan reached into the inside pocket of his winter coat and carefully removed the small silver feather Evelyn had found folded beneath the blankets that morning after the wolf disappeared. He held it gently in his palm before offering it back to her. You found this. Evelyn nodded. I could never explain where it came from. It appears only once in the lifetime of an alpha who survives because another soul chose mercy over fear. Her eyes widened slightly as she accepted the delicate feather. It shimmered softly beneath the winter sunlight, carrying the same quiet warmth she had felt the first time she touched it. Rowan continued with calm certainty. Among my people, it is considered a sign that destiny has revealed itself. Evelyn looked at the feather, then back at him. Destiny. Rowan took one slow step closer, never rushing the moment. Our oldest traditions teach that true bonds are not created by power, wealth, or titles. They are revealed through selfless choices. You did not save a king because he was a king. You saved a stranger because he was alone. His voice softened into little more than a whisper. Long before I learned your name, the moon had already witnessed your heart. The gathered crowd watched in complete silence as Rowan gently placed one hand over his own heart before speaking the words every alpha understood from childhood. The moon chose long before I ever recognized the path. He smiled at Evelyn with quiet certainty. If you are willing, I would like to spend the rest of my life earning the kindness you gave so freely during one winter night. Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes once again, not from surprise, but from the overwhelming realization that nothing about the past few days had been ordinary. She had never dreamed of palaces, titles, or royal honor. She had simply believed that every life deserved warmth when the world became cold. Looking around at the little cabin, the snowy mountains, and the people who had witnessed everything unfold, she understood that destiny had not arrived with thunder or grand celebration. It had arrived as a quiet knock during a storm, asking only whether someone inside would choose compassion. Holding the silver feather carefully against her heart, Evelyn smiled through happy tears, and for the first time since the blizzard began, the winter air no longer felt cold at all. Several weeks later, winter loosened its gentle grip on Black Pine Ridge, yet the little cabin remained exactly where it had always stood, nestled among the towering pines with smoke rising peacefully from its chimney every morning. Many throughout the kingdom expected Alpha King Rowan Ashcroft to return immediately to his royal palace with a grand procession and endless celebrations. Instead, he surprised everyone by making the mountain his first destination after every royal council meeting, every diplomatic journey, and every responsibility that called him away. The royal court soon discovered that while a kingdom could have many castles, a heart only recognized one place as home. Craftsmen from every corner of the realm quietly arrived at Evelyn Carter's cabin during the first days of spring. They did not replace its humble spirit or transform it into a palace. At Rowan's request, they simply strengthened its foundation, repaired the weathered roof, widened the porch where they had watched countless sunsets together, and built larger windows so the morning light could always fill the little home that had once offered warmth to a stranger during the darkest night of winter. Evelyn watched each careful improvement with grateful eyes, smiling every time someone asked whether another grand addition should be made. Her answer never changed. Leave the fireplace exactly where it is. Rowan always smiled when he heard those words because he understood better than anyone that the fireplace was where his second chance at life had truly begun. As the seasons changed, the villagers who had once whispered doubtful rumors became the cabin's most frequent visitors. Children often climbed the hill carrying wildflowers or homemade pies, eager to hear Evelyn tell gentle stories about courage, kindness, and the beauty of helping others without expecting anything in return. She never spoke about crowns or destiny. Instead, she reminded every young listener that one compassionate choice could travel farther than anyone imagined. Mrs. Holloway laughed one afternoon as she watched another group of children leave the cabin with bright smiles upon their faces. You have become the mountain's favorite teacher without ever opening a classroom. Evelyn smiled warmly. Life has always been the best classroom. Rowan, standing nearby, quietly agreed. The royal guards also changed in ways few people noticed at first. Whenever they passed through Black Pine Ridge, they no longer rode past the little cabin without stopping. Each one respectfully greeted Evelyn before continuing toward the capital, not because royal tradition required it, but because every guard understood that their king still lived because someone had chosen kindness over fear. The silver feather remained inside a simple wooden frame above the fireplace, catching the sunlight every morning. Visitors often admired its unusual beauty, but only Rowan and Evelyn truly understood what it represented. It was never displayed as a symbol of power. It remained there as a quiet reminder that compassion could alter the course of history more completely than any battle ever could. One peaceful evening, as gentle snowflakes returned to the mountains for the first time since winter had ended, Rowan and Evelyn stood together on the porch wrapped in warm coats, watching delicate flakes drift across the familiar clearing where frightened whispers had once filled the air. Everything felt wonderfully quiet again. Rowan slipped his hand gently into Evelyn's. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you had never opened that door?" he asked softly. Evelyn looked toward the falling snow before answering with the same calm certainty that had always guided her heart. "I do not think about the life I almost had. I am grateful for the one kindness allowed me to find." Rowan smiled, his eyes reflecting both the snowy landscape and the woman beside him. "Then I will spend every season making sure that kindness always finds its way back to you." They stood together in comfortable silence while the first snow of the new season covered the mountain once again. This time, however, the snow no longer carried loneliness or uncertainty. It carried memories of hope, of unexpected beginnings, and of a quiet promise fulfilled. Far below, the lights of the kingdom shimmered beneath the evening sky, protected by a ruler who had learned that true strength was never measured by authority alone, but by the humility to remember the person who had offered warmth before knowing his name. And high above the valley, inside a small cabin where an ordinary act of compassion had forever changed two lives, the fire continued to burn brightly, welcoming every new winter with the same simple truth that would echo through generations long after their story became legend. The greatest destinies often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. And the warmest home in the world will always be the one where love opens the door before fear has the chance to answer.